Welcome back to another podcast of Recruitment Transactions. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of having a good tech stack and its relevance for M&A transactions. And I'm delighted to have on the program today Brad Courtney, the CTO and co-founder of Recruiter Insider, basically a platform that helps small to mid-sized recruitment companies to elevate the performance of their consultants and also improve the candidate experience through real-time feedback, and I think increasingly through the use of AI. So welcome to the podcast, Brad. Where are you today?
I am located in between Cologne and Bonn in Germany.
Wonderful. I'm in Tokyo at my home office. Be great if you could tell us a little bit about your background. What do you do in your day job?
So what do I do in my day job? Well, I build a lot of software. Um, Take the software through its whole development life cycle, everything from requirements design through to coding, testing, and then release. So I think that's probably it in a nutshell.
And tell me a little bit about Recruiter Insider and your role there. When did you get involved with the business and what does it do? A little bit more than what I said by way of introduction.
All right. So I got involved in it very early. A good friend of mine, the founder of the company, effectively, Justin Hillier, had an idea for a platform for feedback that is specific to recruiting agencies. And he is a big ideas person, wasn't, so let's say, completely technically savvy. So he got me on board to help him develop that idea in more of a technical way. The first build of Recruiter Insider we had built by an external software company just to see, okay, does this idea float? Is there a business behind it? And then as we got further through the process and proved that it was actually a viable business, then being a software as a service business, it made perfect sense for us to insource that development. So we had full control over it, which is where I stepped in and took it over and assumed the CTO. So
Wonderful.
I guess that's sort of the role. The company, I mean, what we do as a product, what we offer as a product is a very comprehensive skills-based analysis of how well an agency and all of their team members are servicing their clients and their candidates. So it's very, very detailed. Offers a lot of very valuable insights. Some of the insights are probably a little counterintuitive, but we'll go through some of these things as we go through this conversation. And we use all of that information, the feedback that we capture to improve the business, to create marketing material, to create content for new clients, existing clients. It's really about taking all of that information that we're gathering and helping an agency deepen their relationships with clients, with candidates.
Brilliant. Let's talk about AI in the recruitment space right now. Like, what is real and what's hype?
Well, I think I would start with saying that some claims of AI are not actually AI. Doesn't mean they're not useful, but it's automation, it's sophisticated automation, but it doesn't necessarily make it AI or AI enabled. So, AI is a very hot topic, of course. You cannot get away from it. So it makes sense to put the AI label on certain things that are useful, but may not necessarily be AI. I think agents are starting to get some attention, or have been for, let's say, 6 to 9 months or so. Very useful examples of agents that are actually out in the wild in the recruitment space are, I don't think, really agents again. So, I mean, there was an example that I saw of even an idea for an agent that came from a recruiting blog or recruiting newsletter or something like that, talking about, imagine having an agent that would send follow-up emails to a candidate at certain points after they've been placed to check in on them. Okay, nice idea, but we've been doing that at Recruiter Insider for probably 4 or 5 years now, and that's nothing more than automation. That's not an agent. Would it help if I explain sort of what the difference between an agent and automation?
I think it would. Not everyone is as tech savvy and computer literate as yourself. So yeah, in layman's terms, if you could.
Okay, so think about the example that I just said, right? So we have a candidate who's been placed. We know what date that started, and we know the candidate's email address. So we have these 3 pieces of data. I have written some software that basically says, at 2 weeks, at 4 weeks, at 6 weeks after the placement, send a follow-up email to check in and see how you're doing, right? So what's happening there is the software is basically just taking all the instructions I gave it and it's just working through those instructions without me doing anything, right? But it's not intelligence, right? It's just following instructions as set by me. Now, when we're getting into that agent, it might be something like this, right? So it might be that an agent gets the trigger to send the first email out, right? So it sends the first email out, but then a response comes back from the candidate. So the agent, without me doing anything in between, will analyze that. Sorry, let me just go back a step. So I've given the instructions on what I want the outcome to be. So this is an important point. An agent has a particular goal that it's trying to achieve. So let's say in this case, our goal here is to make, as good as possible, have the candidate respond in a positive way to say that everything's fine here. That's pretty much all we'll give it as a goal. So it will send an email, it'll get a response. It'll look at the response. Is it good? Is it bad? Okay, it's bad. Maybe I need to send another email more quickly. Maybe I need to send an email or a notification to the consultant to tell them about it. Maybe I need to take some other action. If it's a good result, maybe the goal has been achieved and I'll check back in 3 months' time. But if I do need to respond to the placed candidate, what should that email look like? What should the tone be? What should be offered here? Should I just send it by myself or should I offer it up to the consultant to read it before it goes out? So there's a lot of decision making happening oblivious to me, and it's based on kind of like probabilities. So you get a score back. Okay, what's the probability that I should do that this will result in me getting closer to my goal? So that's a very long way from the example that was given of sending some follow-up emails. It really is trusting, and I think this is the hurdle to overcome in working with agents, putting the trust in a piece of software to make decisions that are not black and white. They're probability based. They're more, okay, if I do this, it'll probably get me closer to my goal. And I think that sophistication, that is certainly one of the goals of many companies that are using AI, but that type of thing is still a little way off, and certainly integrating into a business, that'll take some time to filter through. So I wouldn't buy too much into the agent capabilities right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about agentic AI. I mean, just in terms of your own client universe at Recruiter Insider, what would be the size of sort of the smallest agency you're working with and the largest, just to give us an overview? And where are they in terms of adoption of AI within their business?
So we have single person agencies and we have agencies with 600 plus consultants and everything in between. Some of the smaller ones are probably so. There's a few things that come into play here, particularly in international markets, in Europe, I think as well. And there's still a hesitancy to adopt AI in some larger companies. Certainly widespread. They'll be experimenting with it, but more, I guess, more behind the scenes to see what they can do with it, as opposed to rolling it out widely to all of their client base. I mean, if somebody's on Microsoft, they're probably going to have, the Copilot enabled to help speed up emails and routine type of tasks. But beyond that, I guess the step beyond that is a large language model, putting that into use within the business. This happens a lot more frequently, I would say, in the smaller companies, where they're a little bit more flexible, I guess, on their not desire to their I guess their risk appetite to bring in a new AI, a new sort of system or a new capability like AI. If you're at a large company and you put a large rollout in motion and it's not so well thought through, that can be very damaging. Where in a smaller agency, it's a lot more contained. If you're 10 people, it's not that hard to tell 10 people to stop doing something or manage it a lot more than it is 500 to 1,000. So I think the major exposure is through things that are inbuilt into tools like Copilots, like Recruiter Insider, like ATSs, but also through the mass market large language models, ChatGPT being the most obvious example of that.
Yeah, I've got it. And in terms of tech stacks, and I say this from the perspective of dealing right now with a particular client of mine in Southeast Asia, and they are looking to go to market. So I'm working with them on the sales side, a fairly smallish business, been going for 10, 15 years, well run, and they're doing an incredible amount of work in discussions with myself and offline to improve the quality of their tech stack. And I think they're doing it not just because they're looking to sell the business in the next 6 to 12 months, but also through this journey, they're realizing that they are gaining, some efficiencies. And instead of perhaps hiring another resource or another researcher or someone else on the back office, they're able to use technology and AI to save costs, streamline the business, improve the operational efficiency, and ultimately it's probably going to drive a better exit for them in terms of valuation. So,
sure.
I mean, I know from my own experience, and I'm sure with your clients as well, Brad, you'd agree that there's a wide range of levels of adoption. And it often, in the smaller agencies, it often comes down to the CEO, how curious he is and what sort of risks he wants to take, in terms of experimenting and using it, and just compliance and governance, these things come into play. But if you were to just summarize for us, when you looked at some of your clients in the past, and you've obviously done the integrations of Recruiter Insider into one of their CRMs, their ATSs, whether that's a Vincherry, a Job Adder, a Bullhorn, or whatever, when you've come across a company that has like a really outstanding tech stack, you already described the size of businesses from sort of, a few people to 600. Like, what does a really good tech stack look like to you? What are the key components, would you say?
I think the selection of the right ATS for your business is important. And then making sure that the tools you have around that are well integrated into the ATS, because that's what creates the efficiencies. You don't want to have too many, data sources scattered all around the place. They need to at least talk to each other. So I think an ATS is really a no-brainer for any agency. It's really the center point of an agency, and the selection of that is very important. Or I guess the selection of the right type or the right ATS for your service. Don't necessarily go for the cheapest. Go for the one that is going to suit the type of recruiting that you want to do. So I think if you look outside of that, probably looking at areas like efficiency, marketing, and then being able to understand how you're performing. So, in the efficiency category, I put things like, potentially like calling software. Doesn't have to necessarily be call tracking, but I guess video calling software where you've got, or calling software that can take notes, or create transcripts, can summarize, and handle all of that sort of thing for you. You need some sort of payroll system to make sure that that side of the business, which can be complicated, is as smooth as possible. Things to source candidates, although I think that there's probably, I think that's probably an area where there might be a little too much hype about just how would the candidate search works in some industries that don't have a large digital footprint. But if you're in that industry where you're in software or knowledge work or something like that, where employees do tend to, I was just talking about the three areas that I think are important to consider, which is efficiency, marketing, and performing. So you need your efficiency tools. I was talking about the ability to have a smooth payroll process, the ability to find candidates, the ability to, if you're doing reference checking, automate that part of the process, and of course have a good job board integration. That's all, I think, very smart things to have in place in a way that let you focus on recruiting and not on the administrative side of it. Marketing, I think, is clearly you need your website, you need something like a Canva as a content creation tool. LinkedIn is a platform that is dominated by recruiters basically. And you can also think of some automation tools like a Pager to take your content and distribute that across multiple platforms. Probably the area I think is lacking somewhat is really taking performance seriously. And this is both in KPI and business activity and also your service levels. I think it's really important for business to be able to understand these in a lot of detail. And those that do tend to have better results, they perform better because they can understand exactly where they're falling behind or falling short, and then they can understand why using the qualitative analytics tools. And it takes a lot of guesswork out of, let's say you say quantitative analytics, right? And you say the financials, right? So you could look at that and say, okay, so we're off. Okay, why is that? Okay, now the guesswork starts. So when you're guessing, when you're not as informed down to the detailed level as you could be, then that's an area where I think bad decisions can get made, and bad decisions can be costly because anybody in a management director or owner position is effectively their job is to make good decisions, and your decisions will be made very much better if you have the information to make the decisions with. So there's a couple of third-party KPI and business activity reporting tools. And a good ATS should have it built into the system itself. But even those that have the ability technically to do it don't necessarily, I don't think, pay enough attention to the detailed part of that. You don't have to dive into the detail straight away. You can definitely have an overview and figure out, okay, where are you, what broad areas are we, maybe do we need improvement? But when you find those broad areas, you really want to drill down into the detail and use that information to make some good decisions.
Yeah.
So,
And you said
just one last thing I'll say on that, on the consideration of AI, bringing that into a company, whether it's via tools that you already have in your business, or whether it's a large language model type of tool, then I think what makes sense is to take a look at the jobs that you have within the agency, break them down task by task level, and I don't mean a job description, I mean really breaking down what are the tasks that each of us do, what are the tasks that take up our time, and then look within those tasks for areas where AI might be able to help you. I think that's a smart way to go about choosing which AI to use, which AI functions to use, and getting the most bang for buck out.
Got it. So you've said feedback is a performance driver. Can you give some real world examples from Recruiter Insider's perspectives?
Yeah, so there's a couple of areas I think I can give some examples. So we've talked about Recruiter Insider surfacing detailed candidate and hiring manager experience metrics. And this is something that we do throughout the entire hiring process. So it's not just at placement, it's at interview with the recruiter when the candidate and the recruiter meet. It's the candidate client interview, where the candidate meets the client, and then it's also placement and then post placement after that as well. Now, what we routinely find, time and time again, and this will come into our discussion later on about recruiting in an AI type of world, but there is a huge difference in the performance of consultants that get the first two parts of the hiring process right. Right? It's by far the most important part of the process. How the interview with the candidate goes from a consultant candidate point of view, how the candidate client interview goes, those things make an outsized difference on whether or not something goes through to placement. So I'll give you some examples of where this has, where our clients have been able to use this information to improve their performance. So we had an agency that could see that they weren't preparing candidates for interviews. The scores kept dropping, a couple of months in a row, or 3 or 4 months in a row. The scores were going down, and they looked at it and said, "Okay, we're seeing something here. Let's take it seriously. Let's put some effort into training our consultants on how to prepare their candidates to go and interview well." And they put that into place, and after the consultants had utilized that training and I guess internalized the better practices, their fill rates actually doubled the following month, and that was a credit to the agency and the consultants for taking that information, doing something with it, putting the effort in, and then seeing the results come out at the end of it. So a second one was there was a particular consultant who was not performing well in the prior stage to that interviewing the candidate. So their scores were a long way below average, and it was a similar situation. The agency spoke to the consultant. The consultant agreed, "Okay, yes, I can see that I'm not doing well here. I need to improve." And they put the effort into the training. The consultant put a lot of effort into improving their skills, and then the candidate trust in the consultant improved, and then the KPIs went on to improve after that. They're two examples. It happens very often, though.
Got it. So we talk maybe a little bit about AI and how are you using that within your business specifically? How is it making your work more efficient? Are you managing to save some costs? Are you managing to get more of a home work-life balance? Like, at a very personal level, how is it helping you in your business and private life?
Okay. So I mentioned that I am largely a software developer. That is that is the thing that takes up the majority of my day. It has helped immensely with making that more efficient. In my particular situation, I'm doing front end, which means HTML, which means JavaScript. I'm doing back end, which is another language called C#. I'm doing database, which is another language, which is SQL. And then I'm spending time on the infrastructure side of it with AWS and the various commands that are necessary to keep that successfully running. So I'm dealing with a lot of different languages, and in programming languages, if you make a small mistake, it can basically mean that the entire function doesn't work. So it's very exacting. Now, what large language models are really good for is if I can describe exactly what I want, and this is a large part of getting good results out of a large language model, but if I can express what I really want, in which language I want it, then it can certainly cut down my development time, because there's certain specifics of these four languages that I don't necessarily need to learn exactly. And I use a lot on the front end, because front end development, which means the user interface and the interactivity that is between the user and the system, that is extraordinarily flexible. You can do almost anything with the UI in terms of design, layout, switch between mobile and desktop. Even if you're dragging the screen closer together, it all starts to reform and reshape. But with all of that flexibility comes an enormous amount of options, an enormous amount of little bits of information that you need to remember. And it's quite frankly very overwhelming to remember them all. So a large language, excuse me, if you can describe the problem well, a large language model is good enough to go and pick that up. And really, tailor the suggestion it gives me specifically to my problem. So there are a lot of occasions where I can copy paste a small segment of code, especially on the front end, that will do some small tasks that I needed to. I guess prior to having a large language model, you would have to go online to look for something that you hadn't encountered before, especially with a language you hadn't encountered before. Hope that somebody had encountered the same thing. If they hadn't, then you had to kind of put a couple of things together. And large language models make that much, much easier. Now, they're not perfect. You still have to test them. You still have to check them and all the rest of it. But certainly software is the area, I think, currently where large language models are having the largest impact. So that's certainly flown through to me, and I've seen my efficiency and just my just confidence in that I can solve a problem quickly. That's been greatly increased. So they're very useful in that respect. Okay, it's probably not relevant for everybody watching this podcast, but also things like analytics. So if we've got a large data set, we've got millions of reviews on our platform and testimonials and that type of thing. And you can take that data set. If we often look through it and say, okay, well, is the data showing us this, or could this be true? Can we check in the data? And we use the large language models to do a first pass of the analysis of that data to see, okay, are we on the right track, or is this complete bullshit? So it's a good first pass. Again, it's something that does need to be checked fairly thoroughly afterwards, and anything that I would build into the platform would be then more thoroughly done. We use it for idea generation, that type of thing as well, to bounce ideas around. Again, I think a lot of these things are around getting to an 80% draft as quickly as we can. if you can find out that your theories are not supported by your data set, then you can throw that away a lot more quickly now than previously. So it allows you to test out a lot more ideas, which is very useful when you're creating software products. We've also built it into the platform as well. We've got a feature which I really like called case studies, and I think a case study is probably fairly clear what that is. Is that fair to say? Okay. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so if you're pitching to if you're an agency and you're pitching to a company that needs software engineers, you want to show them how well you perform in finding such roles. And a case study means that if you were to put together a case study, then you would go into your ATS, you would look for which roles have we filled, do they match the description of software, software engineer, what are our fill rates on those jobs, which ones did we get feedback about, make all the calculations about the service levels we provided on those, and then put it into a pack. Now that's a lot of small tasks. That's a lot of death by 1,000 paper cuts type of work, where you're doing a lot of small tasks, you're taking data from all over the place, and then you're effectively categorizing it in a way that is time consuming. Not everybody goes through with a case study just because of the effort involved in it. And we've integrated a large language model into our platform that will do all of that in effectively a button click. So it's using AI to look at all of your jobs, categorize them into job families, finding the ones that have the feedback, doing all of that calculations, and then giving you a well-formatted document at the end. And that's been really popular with our clients. Many of them have successfully used it in pitches because it really speaks to, you go to a client, potential client, or an existing client, I guess, if they've got other needs, and you can say, here's some very specific, relevant information for you about how we represent, other clients or yourself when we're looking for this specific type of job that you're after.
Such a cool feature. Thanks for sharing that. And let's just talk a little bit about the limitations of AI too, and why hopefully recruiters are still relevant and will be for a long time to come. Your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a guy called Andre Karpathy, and he's an AI expert, I believe. I probably should check this. That he was head of AI at Tesla for a time being. Very, very knowledgeable guy in the world of AI, probably somebody you would consider very much a leader in that field. And he put out a 3.5-hour video, which I've watched several times, about how large language models work, like getting really into the details of how they work. And one of the things he said, which I thought was really interesting, was instead of like this kind of mystical ask the AI, right? What you're doing is, you're asking for the results of the data labelers at OpenAI or something like that. So these the most sophisticated large language models go through a sort of a training stage where they have humans go through and label the data in terms of quality, correctness, a whole bunch of types of labels, and the results you're getting are effectively highly influenced by the average data labeler, a company like that. So it's important to remember that these things are not some sort of all-wise, all-knowing, anything like that, right? They've been trained on data from the internet. There's a lot of rubbish on the internet. And there's a lot of standardization on the internet too, in terms of marketing websites, in terms of the way certain things are phrased, the way messaging is put out there. It was an area, and I don't know if you sort of experienced this, while we were going through that internet growth phase, but just endless almost like a standardization, best practices. This is how to, these are often websites that would offer this sort of, this is the best way to do X, Y, and Z, or market your product or whatever it is, and do it for free. And then you had tools like sort of Wix and Squarespace and that type of stuff that came along and almost standardized what you need to have on a website. And I guess all of this standardization has led to a homogenization of how information is assembled, which is why that a lot of the large language models sound extremely similar when they're outputting their information. So keep all that in mind when you're getting any type of output. It really is an averaging of the information that's on the internet combined with this is what the data labelers think is a good answer or a good set of words effectively. So I think that's an important thing to remember in terms of these things are data crunchers, word crunchers, and that's all well and fine, and they're incredible, no doubt. But I don't think they really. I mean, they don't stand between like a people to people relationship, right? So recruitment being about relationships. And this goes back to the point I made before about those first two stages of the process, right? That interaction with the candidate, the interaction with the client, and then the interaction between the client and the candidate. Like that's all people to people. And that's where the recruiter is, still well ahead of AI, especially in AI. Well, in particular, those that actually really value that and put effort into making that the core of their work. I mean, from my point of view, a recruiter really changed the trajectory of my career. And, basically what she did was she understood where I was at, including telling me at the time, CV's not great. This is after I just returned from Germany back to Australia and had taken a couple of years out of my, career at the time as it was, my more corporate type of career. And she spent some time and she said, look, I can see you back yourself. This is really important. I think I know where to at least start you on your next step. And she sent me to a place which was, a good fit for me, and I landed the job. She understood how I fit into the culture there. She understood her client, she understood me, and she understood that when we got together and had a conversation, it would fit really well together. So that she didn't do using data. That she did by spending time with me, spending time with them, and knowing that this is a match that's going to work. So, again, going back to the point I made before, like this first part of the process, these first stages of the process are where you get the wins, right? You collect the paycheck at the end of placement, but that's the area where the good outperform the average, right? And that doesn't change, I don't think, when we're integrating AI. I mean, the ideal situation here is that AI is used in such a way that makes your technology tooling a lot easier to use. So maybe your need to be a bullhorn expert fades away because it's just become so intuitive that it doesn't really matter which ATS you're using. And that frees you up time to spend more time on the first two stages here, which, as I said, that's where you get your wins.
Thank you. I'm a little concerned that there's a lot of recruiters that almost like becoming overly reliant on certain AI, particularly ChatGPT. So, if you look at LinkedIn and there's just so much homogeneity in the responses.
Yes.
The grammar's perfect. It's definitely being cultivated in the background and it's very samey. And, I think that if you take that to the more practical example, when you're out there doing recruitment work, what AI can't do is it can't read a room. It doesn't have EQ. It doesn't have intuition. It doesn't have a gut feeling. It can't read facial expressions. And I think that, that's where, there is a place still for recruiters, to apply these very natural, very human skill sets that some of us have, some more abundance than others, and really develop and work on those. And as you say, AI and the other tech tools are fantastic. They're going to save a lot of time, and probably it's going to lead to some redundancies in some of the research functions and some of the resource functions, because you can use technology, you can outsource things. But in my view, at least, is for recruiters who, people, which is what recruiters should be, and able to, use AI to do some important background checks on clients and candidates they're going to meet, and gather various information that's out there on the internet and distill it down in a pitch, or an opening line, or whatever it is. But they still need these very core skill sets of curiosity and intelligence, and listening skills and EQ that the good recruiters have. So I think that's really important to remember. If I could
just on that note, you say that that there will be some roles that are redundant, but if you have no, if you still have the same budget, then you could take that person and turn them into a revenue generator in terms of making them, turning them into a recruiter. And if you're spending less time technically, if you're developing people skills of the consultants that you have in your team, then that seems like a pretty good opportunity. If you're if you have more opportunity to effectively have a larger revenue generating team as opposed to a non-revenue generating team, then I think that's a very, very positive thing for small, medium, large agency.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, not everyone can make that shift, but definitely the trend will be more towards sales, business developers, and probably a smaller back office and a smaller research and resourcing function. Just in terms of any advice that you would give to new founders of recruitment businesses, early stage recruitment entrepreneurs, if you like, and even existing businesses, when you think about tech roadmap for these guys, 2025 and beyond, like what advice would you be giving them in terms of building a kind of a really, really effective tech stack from day one?
So I think what I mentioned before about, so let's say you've got your plan for your company and you've got your plan for your team, small team, I guess if it's somebody who's founding, then break those down into tasks. What should these people be doing? Not job descriptions. Actually, you may even, if you want to be, very adventurous, then I guess what you could do is say, look, these are the things that we need to do as a business. Right? So almost like a task-based view of a business rather than a job-based view of a business, and say, okay, so which of these tasks could we look at automating from day one, so that that's just part of our business? Which ones of these could be an AI function from day one? All right, that way you're sort of starting on that situation where, okay, we are very much enabled by AI. It's just part of the business. It's not something that we need to bring in at a later point. It just becomes part of how you work with the technologies. So I think that's probably a really good way to start. Having said that, you do need to keep a human in the loop on the AI outputs. So I wouldn't have an AI sending out emails to clients and candidates or anything like that. I think you should probably just make sure that you've got some good practices for security in place. And by that, I mean the simplest thing that you could do is use a password manager and make sure your team is using a password manager. They're built into pretty much all the main browsers. If you're using Macs, there's an app that that basically manages those in the background. Chrome, I think it's all managed within Chrome. I think Edge is the same under Windows. 1Password is also a great tool for managing those, but a lot of data breaches are caused by like a social engineering and then accessing a password. Those two things, as opposed to a massive hack or something like that. That's I think something you should also build into the company from day one. Just that care that okay, we've got a lot of data. It's proprietary data. We want to keep it and just build it into the process. That's a pretty simple thing to do, I think. If you're planning on using an LLM to help you process, analyze data, that type of thing, then maybe think about getting some sort of private offering for that, like a hosted version on Azure or something like that. Simply because what happens with the data that you upload to OpenAI is that they may use it to train on, they may use it. Nobody really knows, right? There was a while that they sort of said the documents that you upload to OpenAI should be considered public or something like that, right? So you don't want to be doing that with sensitive, confidential document data. You want to make sure that that's all being kept within the same area. Now, the offering of Microsoft, if you really want to go with OpenAI, as an example, then you can use like a managed service via Microsoft to have access to OpenAI, but the data never leaves your environment. So, that's probably a good thing to think about as well. But I think, from day one, really saying, okay, this is where we can start on an AI front foot. That will give you two things. It will give you the efficiencies that effective efficiencies for AI that you can take advantage of from day one, but it will also give you and your team just this confidence in working with AI from day one, because you will go through, you'll go through challenges with it. You will go through situations where it hallucinates and you have to deal with it. And I think having that type of process in place and that type of work skill set, almost a mindset, almost I'm very used to this. It's just part of my job. I think that's a good way to start a company at the moment. We talked about tooling before, but I don't necessarily think the selection of important tools has changed at the moment. I think you just need to think about, here are the tasks that we need to do to be a effective recruiting agency, and what can we automate? And then the final thing I'll say is, if you really want to make the most of even the future capabilities of AI, get detailed data on quality and on performance. I think this is really important to understand that the more good, clean data you have, and especially data that's specific to your agency, the more you'll be able to do with AI in the future.
Thanks, Brad. I think I just want to pick up the point that you made about security and compliance, because I think what I'm seeing, at least in the market, is that the smaller boutiques, some of them at least, they're taking, they're trying out different types of AI. They're taking more risks with it, and they're probably uploading it into LLMs and having a good crack. And
Yes.
there may not be as many safety protocols around that as some of the larger listed or global recruitment businesses. So on the one hand, you made the point about putting it behind Azure or something like that to protect it in a more private environment rather than this open to the whole world type thing. Potentially could be. But on the other hand, these big companies, they're not experimenting and they're not innovating in the same way that the smaller, newer boutiques, are more nimble and coming up and growing up. The new startups are just like, they're just taking this from day one. So I'm just wondering about the impact of this on the larger recruitment businesses in the next few years, right? If their recruitment consultants don't have access to the same tools because it's taking longer to get approvals, it's taking longer to, look at the compliance aspects and the integrations and test it. They're, on the one hand, there's more safety, there's more compliance, there's less risk, but on the other, they're not really experimenting and going with this very fast changing technology that we're seeing out there. So it's a bit of a kind of I don't know, 6 to 1, half a dozen to the other, which is the right way to go. But I think you're making the point that if you are building your tech stack these days, you by all means experiment, go look what's out there, but make sure that you have at least some levels of compliance and rules and systems in place to protect the data. Because if you have a breach, your clients and candidates are not going to be very happy about that, and it could destroy your business, right?
Theoretically, it could do that, yeah. I mean, look, there's always a tension between adoption of any new type of technology between smaller and larger companies. Larger companies tend to be more risk averse, and you know they they have more to lose. So I think that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, get it. I'll tell you what we'll do, Brad, because you've been extremely helpful to helping us understand what a good tech stack looks like, and the role of AI and its limitations too. Is we'll try to kind of co-create a tech stack that looks what we think would be suitable for a recruitment business out there to have a look at, compare it with what they have. I might lean on you for your advice on that offline, and we can put a link into that in the comments.
Sure.
But I'll also put a link in there to Recruiter Insider and your business, because you've talked about how your business helps, elevate recruiter performance and the candidate experience. And I think some of the people listening to this will probably want to reach out to you and Justin, your co-founder. So we'll put that in as well. And thank you very much for your time. Really, really enjoyed our conversation, and looking forward to seeing the feedback we get for the podcast.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me on. This was my very first podcast. I don't tend to do a lot of public appearances as not being the face of AI. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you having me on and taking the time to hear my thoughts on this very interesting area.
No problems. Thank you.